Okay, hello everybody. I hope you are enjoying your Monday more than I'm enjoying mine. It's been a little bit of a rough day for me. Let's just make sure that we are actually live. There it is. Is that you in the background?
Yeah, that's my feedback. I
Okay.
thought I had this muted. One second. There we go.
Okay. Cool. Well, we should be joined shortly by Patrick, but for now it's just me and Curt. So hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Steven Stark. I apologize for being so late. It was one of those days at work, and then we had to travel for several hours to get to Oklahoma City, and I just timed it very poorly. My apologies. Thanks to everyone who actually showed up. Um, but I'd like to start by welcoming my guests. Right now, all we have is Curt. Curt is a player in my current D&D game. We get together about once every 2 weeks, spend about 4 hours of that Saturday playing the D&D thing. So, Curt, you want to introduce yourself some more?
Yeah. I go by Outer Panda on the Twitters. It's a whole lot of fun. I think that's where I'm sure all of you know me. And yeah, excited to talk about D&D, like and get into every aspect of it and how we can connect it to everything else.
Right. Well, I'm just going to shout out some folks from the chat. I see Vanessa MSD, who's been tweeting me back and forth this week about this topic. She doesn't know much about D&D, so we're going to get into that. Ridiculous Ed Tullett is here. Hey, Ridiculous Ed, aka Sean. Julie Beth Styles, hello. Thanks all y'all for coming, but I guess I'm ready to just jump right in. So I was going to start with what is Dungeons and Dragons, which is a big question with not a simple answer. But I'm going to make an effort to explain it the best I can. So the best way I know to start is Dungeons and Dragons is a cooperative storytelling game, meaning that everybody who gets together to play is doing so for the purpose of telling a story together. Um, and that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But oh, well, I'll stop right there because we are joined by Patrick, another player from my current D&D game. Patrick, you want to introduce yourself real quick? I might have jumped the gun. He might be still like getting synced or something.
Yeah. Cool, cool.
Okay. Oh, there he is. Hey,
Hey,
Patrick.
do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I hear you
Hey,
now.
my name is Patrick. On Twitter, I go by @an_enemy_spy.
Yeah, and the links for both of these gentlemen are in the description already. So if you want to follow them on Twitter, they're all of our Twitter handles are down in the. I believe the technical term is doobly doo.
Wibbly, wibbly, wobbly, goobly.
Something like that. So what is Dungeons and Dragons? Again, I guess I got to. It's a cooperative storytelling exercise experience. But
Dude, I know the live stream's too. I'm coming.
oh, Patrick, can you mute when you're not talking? All right, I might just have to mute him myself for a moment. Okay. Anyway, um, hi Melinda. Hi Duncan the Small. Thanks for coming. So what is D&D? It's generally speaking 3 to 7 or 8 people sitting around a table telling a story together. Now, it's a game, meaning that there are rules, but it's not a game like most people think of a game. Hey Terry T, how are you? Uh, it's a game that you don't win or lose, and you don't play against the other players. You play with the other players. Um, I'm sure several of you have played some sort of RPG game, be it like Skyrim or Fallout or um, Final Fantasy. The difference between those video games and a tabletop version, the one that I love the most, is the freedom that comes with not being restricted by a game engine. You know, in Final Fantasy, if you want to change your hairstyle, you maybe can't do that. In Skyrim, you can't just stop where you are and decide in this spot I'm going to build a house. You can't. You can only do what the game is programmed to allow you to do, what it thinks you might want to do eventually. Whereas when you don't have the constraints of a game engine, you just do what you want. Um, and let's get into some of the more basic elements about Dungeons and Dragons, because when you sit down at a table, you're going to be one of two types of people at the table. You're going to be a player or you're going to be a dungeon master. Now, each table, and I'll use some shorthand here. A player is a person who is playing a character. The character they're playing is called a player character. I might just say PC because that's faster. And then a related idea is the NPC, the non-player character, which is any character not directly controlled by one of the players. Then you have the dungeon master or game master or storyteller, depending on what system. I use dungeon master because we're talking specifically about Dungeons and Dragons, and I may use DM for shorthand for that. A dungeon master's job is to set the stage and explain the outcomes of actions. And if it helps, one of the best analogies you can draw is thinking of your Dungeons and Dragons game like an ongoing television show. All of your player characters are the main characters, the main heroes of the story. The dungeon master is the director, the set designer. And if he's really good, the sound editor, and he wears lots of hats. He is also the arbitrator of the rules. So the dungeon master comes up with like a series of challenges, and the players try to decide how they overcome those challenges based on the character they're playing. So let's talk about a player character real quick. Curt,
Yo.
What's your player character like?
Yeah, Nemric Truck, the librarian cleric of mine. I love her.
Notice he said her. Curt is playing a lady. You are not.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things about a role-playing game is that you're not restricted. I mean, I'm a 44-year-old white man. I'm never going to be hired to play Rosa Parks. You know what I mean? Like, but as in Dungeons and Dragons, I could play a character who is female, who is taller than me, who is shorter than me, who has a completely different ethnic background, who has a completely different worldview, and that's part of the fun of the game is making that character.
Yeah, and when I was creating the character, I thought, for just the purposes of being able to maybe write females better in the future, or just like, but like, to be able to play that role, but not hacky, but to be like, all right, what would I actually do, differently? And also, the rest of the crew was guys, and I thought it'd be interesting to switch up the dynamic that way. It would work well.
It had a huge impact, but it does make things different from time to time. So, Patrick, your character is also like not exactly like you. In what way? He's kind of a standoffish jerk sometimes.
Yeah, not anything like me in real life. No. Yeah. So my guy, his name is Star, and he's an elf ranger. So he's a survival expert. He's a tracker. He's a hunter. He's got a mysterious background.
Right. And when you and when I say it's collaborative storytelling, like in our first game, I set a scene. The four of our players, these two and the two others, I just created a scene where they were all sitting in a bar together, which is classic starting for an RPG.
Yeah.
And then I gave them opportunities to seek adventure. Now, one of the things you will find when playing Dungeons and Dragons, especially, is that you're not going to play a farmer or a baker or or a cobbler. That's they don't live the life of excitement. Just like you don't necessarily watch a TV show about a baker unless it's a comedy show, and then you're watching because it's funny, not because it's a baker. No, the whole point of playing Dungeons and Dragons or games like it is usually to play the hero.
Food Network's pretty popular.
Or the villain, if that's the way you lean, which is another perfectly acceptable way to play the game. You can play as a group of evil people trying to, get their way in the world and get one over on the man and however they can.
If I could stop you right there, Stephen, for a
Sure.
second. Yeah. So Namluk is, generally, a good person, has devoted their life to, a god in service of, knowledge. And just this last weekend, you confronted me with a situation where it's like, if I could talk the crew into taking this lady's magic ring, it would make me very powerful.
Yeah.
And I really, like, more than I can think of any situation in even my real life in the recent past where I was like, how dark am I willing to go down this path to make myself more powerful?
Yeah, my character was very in favor of getting that ring too.
I know you were, but that's part of the fun of the game is watching player A and player B not agree, or their characters not agree. At the end of the day, you need to be buddies. We're all friends. We all came here to do this thing to have fun. But characters disagreeing. I bet it was fun for the two of you to argue that out on some level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's fun for me is watching you guys go along with the main quest, and my character is just like, I don't want to do this. This is terrible. This is a bad idea. They're gonna double cross us at every turn because that's what I would do to them.
Right. Because you're playing a character who's a very, like, you would stab somebody in the back if you thought it would give you a one-up.
Yeah.
But that situation where we were all, debating, and redemption was, pulling me to the light, and Antian, was like, well, is there money in it or not? And like, and, it was great because like Antian was like, well, there's not the money in it. We're not going to sell it. It's so like, let's keep, leave it alone.
But that's just a really good illustration of how it is collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. That cohesive group moment
right.
Of like, all right, we place our votes.
There's no right or wrong way to play the game either. Exactly. Like, okay, there is a right way. The right way is the way that everybody's having fun.
Yeah.
That is the right way. The wrong way is when your character did a thing to my character and now I'm mad at you because of it. That's not what the game is about. It's about, again, I like to think of it like actors in a TV show, and the dungeon master is the director and like the showrunner. And part of the great thing about this style of game is that week after week after week, when you come back to the table and play the same character over and over again, you have history with them. You can become just as involved with your Dungeons and Dragons character as you ever did with any character from your favorite piece of media, book, TV show, movie, whatever. You can grow to love them just as much, and probably more because you're the one building that character.
It was such a fun moment because Star has been very standoffish and closed about his past and anything related to that. Like a few snippets have come out here and there, and just this last Saturday, and when Darsala was like, speaking to him directly about his parents and his
Darsala
past.
is a bad guy from our campaign.
Yeah, I got here a
But,
little
like-
late. Do they know the plot, or is Curt just saying a bunch of words they don't know?
No, they don't.
I'm just saying a bunch of words.
Yeah,
But whatever. It's cool.
It's cool.
Get in your own game.
Yeah.
But,
get in your own game. Give it a try. If you're
Yeah.
not sure what it is, we'll go over some things that will help you. Like if I have not explained it well enough, and I'm sure I haven't explained it well enough for everybody. Let's be real. There are some other resources out there where you can literally watch a game being played. There's a show called Critical Role, one of the craziest, most incredible, blown up. It blew my mind when I started looking into Critical Role, how much money they make, how many views they generate, and it's a bunch of well-known voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons, and streamed on Twitch. You can watch it on YouTube as well. But
there's
actually,
the community episode. That's a great introduction.
Yeah.
The community D&D episode.
Yep, that's a good one. There's also a good episode of Freaks and Geeks that gets into Dungeons and Dragons. But I wanted to get into the history of the game now a little bit. And for that, I'm going to go all the way back to the 6th century CE.
Nice.
And
I
from
didn't realize the game was that old.
Dungeons and Dragons is not that old, but that is where we first get the game of chess. Okay? Chess is an abstracted battlefield. Chess originates in India when the Persian Empire, when Arabs conquered the Persian Empire, they encountered chess, and chess quickly spread across the Islamic world in the 7th and 8th centuries until it spread all the way across North Africa and into Spain through the Moorish conquest of southern Spain. Chess, an abstraction of battlefield of a war. Now we're going to fast forward to the 17 and 1800s, the Napoleonic era. Little children get these toy soldiers, sometimes by the dozen, and they're just soldiers that you can paint, and you've seen them in 100 movies about that era, about the Victorian era, the pewter soldiers. But in 1913, somebody had the idea to write rules to make a chess-style game out of their toy soldiers. That someone was H.G. Wells. Yes, that H.G. Wells. He published a set of rules called Little Wars, Rules for Combat Between Napoleonic-Era Toy Soldiers. Now, and then in 1968, a wargamer named Gary Gygax founded Gen Con in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which I think is a great name. Gen Con, because it's in Lake Geneva Convention, but it's a wargaming con, and it's like the Geneva Convention. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I love it.
I'm going to have to go to that now someday.
And
do they still have that?
Oh yeah, Gen Con. Oh yes, Gen Con. The first one was maybe 200 people. It's probably 60,000 plus annually now, because I looked that up too. But Gary Gygax was playing things like these little wars that, and in the intervening, 50 odd years, new rules for new things had come out. People were starting to look at medieval era, more modernized things, World War II stuff. And I'm sorry, I lost my spot for a second. But Gary Gygax was an avid player of all these style of games. At Gen Con 2, Gary Gygax met a man named Dave Arneson from Minneapolis. And they wanted to make rules, good rules, together for a medieval war game that on a large scale. So they worked together. They corresponded by mail for the next couple of years. And in 1971, Gary Gygax published Chainmail, Rules for Medieval Combat. But and again, this was units of mounted knights facing pikemen and archery units, 20 archers at a time or more. That's what this game was designed for. But in the appendix of this first printing of Chainmail, there were two appendices. One for one-on-one combat between heroes of either side, and a second for adding fantasy elements to your game. So what happens next is Dave Arneson, who had met Gygax and worked with him on Chainmail a little bit, got a hold of the Chainmail rules and adapted a new game to be played using the single combat rules and the fantasy elements rules. And part of the best part about that is that his first attempt at something like this was a game set in a Napoleonic era town where he gave individual players individual characters to play, and they would each have an individual objective. Some were good guys, some were bad guys, but these were the nascent ideas. Dave Arneson took the Chainmail rules, drew a map on a piece of grid paper so that you could make little hallways. He drew a map that was the first ever dungeon, hence the name Dungeons and Dragons. There was a dragon in it, believe it or not.
Nice.
At the end of it.
Well, why would you have a dragon?
But he had his handful of players play their characters. Now, one of the things that had never really happened before was everybody that sits down to play a game together, they're all players. But when you start to have unknown elements to the game and unsure outcomes and instances of the rules where there has to be a final arbitrator, Dave Arneson recognized the need for an impartial referee. And that's what it was called at the time, a referee. We're not to Dungeon Master yet. And he also introduced the idea of leveling up, which should be pretty obvious to most of us today. But Gary Gygax did not invent the Dungeon Master, and he did not invent leveling. That was Dave Arneson. But at this point, it's also classic what we in the hobby would call dungeon crawl. It's basically, I'm in town, I go to the dungeon, I kill things in the dungeon, I steal their treasure, I go back to town and buy better stuff, and then I rinse and repeat, which is a fine way to play the game if that's what you're into. But there was not that much in the way of actual what we in the modern hobby would call role playing or social interaction between characters. But so later in the year of 1971, Dave Arneson writes an article for a gaming magazine, which is read by Gary Gygax in the fall of 1971, and he asks him to demo his game at the next Gen Con, which he does. And from there, the idea for the original Dungeons and Dragons is truly born. Gary Gygax and some of his friends borrow money and create a company called Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR, which those of us that are familiar with the old stuff, TSR is the company that made Dungeons and Dragons for the first 15 years, 20 years of its existence. He borrowed enough money for the first print, printed 1,000 copies, and they sold out. But he took that money, and instead of just, what he did was then get to work on creating a better set of rules. And so in 1977, we got a new edition of the game, the first designed for mass marketing, and the rules were redone to make the game more accessible to non-war gamers. And this is a product that was sold in game stores. This was what most of us would recognize as original basic Dungeons and Dragons. 1978 sees the advent of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, a codified set of more advanced rules with more options for players and dungeon masters. And in that same year, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons considered by most people to be the true version of the game as opposed to the basic set, which is really for beginners. But also in 1978, a Michigan State University student named James Egbert disappeared from his dorm room. He went wandering in the tunnels and disappeared, committed suicide. The story was he had committed suicide, and he had done so. When the police began investigating, they found these books with these weird demons pictures in it, and all these strange words and charts and tables, and they were just convinced that demonic forces had caused him to cast a spell and kill himself. Never mind that he turned up a few weeks later in Louisiana, safe and sound. The idea that Dungeons and Dragons was somehow linked to satanic or evil powers was now in the cultural zeitgeist. So thus begins the Satanic Panic, which you might think would destroy the popularity of the game. It had largely the opposite effect. And
a bit of a Streisand effect there.
Correct. So the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons skyrocketed. There was a cartoon. There were toys.
And what better way to piss off your fundamentalist parents than, play the demon game?
Yep. There were books. There were game accessories. There were pre-generated adventures for your characters to go on. There were the Dragonlance novels are hugely popular and are, to be honest, one of the only things that kept the company afloat in the mid to late 80s. So in the late 70s and early 80s, popularity went up a lot. Great deal. In 1984, Gygax hired Lorraine Williams. A year later, she had silently acquired a majority and fired Gygax from the company he founded, TSR. Turned TSR basically into a publishing house for the Dragonlance novels. Ms. Williams is noted as not being a gamer, and Gygax is known as being a gamer, not a businessman. He ended up being able to lose his majority sharehold because of some really bad business practices. There are stories, and everything that I have looked into corroborates that at least some of it is true, that there were books printed in the second edition that even if they sold the book at cover price, they were losing money, which is not a good way to do business. You can't sell your product at a loss, But so the company struggled on, mostly not going under, based on the power of its books, the Dragonlance series especially, and also its license was video gaming for Dungeons and Dragons has been popular since video games have been around. You can go play Dungeons and Dragons themed video games right now, and part of the appeal of that is Dungeons and Dragons has maps. It has a lot. There's dice rolling. There's math to be done, and the computer can streamline all of that. It makes it for an interesting and fun way to play a game. But anyway, TSR went bankrupt, and bidding. A few companies bid on it, but all of their licenses were acquired by Wizards of the Coast. For those of you who are gamers out there, you might know Wizards of the Coast as the creators of Magic the Gathering, probably the most popular card game of all time. I'm not even going to go with probably. It absolutely is. All you Pokemon players out there need to get with the program. And so with Wizards of the Coast acquisition, there came a new edition of the rules, which were considered more streamlined. Wizards of the Coast eventually got bought out by Hasbro. Hasbro owns the Dungeons and Dragons license to this day through its holding of Wizards of the Coast. And then in 2008, we got what's called 4th edition. There was a lot of backlash from players over that, which led Hasbro eventually to 5th edition, which is the edition that I play with my players right now. That's what we're playing, is 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. And I find it to be one of the better versions of the game. Pretty balanced, customizable enough that you don't have to feel pigeonholed. If you're a fighter, you don't have to be like every other fighter, but distinct enough that if you're a fighter, you still feel like a fighter. And that kind of brings us up to the modern era. With the rise of geek culture, Dungeons and Dragons has made a resurgence, especially because I grew up, like it says in the description, I played Dungeons and Dragons for the first time in the summer of 1984. And I played it over and over and over again. Ed, you're allowed to play 3.5 if that's what you want. Here's my rule for gaming. If you're having fun, you're doing it right. But I played my first game 35 years ago almost, and I still play today because I get something from it that I can't get anywhere else. I have friends around me. We're all engaging our intellect, our creativity. We're trying to figure out how to tell a story together. And some of the ways it's helped me personally, you'll learn to be better at math. I was always good at math, but like real talk, most of you that know me know that I have an anxiety disorder. Okay, I'm pretty open about that, but Dungeons and Dragons is a medium that lets me work through some of my social anxieties. Lets me work through. I know for a fact that some role playing games are used as therapy for people who have experienced various traumas. As a way to work through it in a safe space, or just down to, hey, I don't like what they did, how they did this character on this show. I think it would be cooler if they did it this other way. Well, just play that character then in your game. The freedom to do what you want can be kind of intimidating, but it's also really liberating once you get the hang of it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I love D&D for a multitude of reasons, but I've been going on pretty much nonstop for about 35 minutes. My mouth is quite dry. I need a drink. I'm just going to say hello and welcome to Evil Ducky and Catherine Harding. I just now see you showing up. Isabel or Sarah. Hello, Sarah. How are you? I'm going to go grab a drink. I'll be right back. Guys, entertain them.
Okay.
Yeah. Why do you like this game, man?
Way I got into Dungeons and Dragons is when I was in 5th grade. I had a friend named Aaron, and he brought in a box set. Like, I think it was the first 3rd edition, because for those of you not to know, there's 2 3rd editions. There's 3.0 and then there's 3.5, which is my personal favorite edition. But he had the 3.0 box, and we played a bit during recess. We just played characters out of the box. We didn't create our own. But I was a cleric named Jozan, and that's just one of the guys out of the box. And I remember we're fighting a dire rat, and I had the choice to either I could either kill it or I could cast a spell and turn it to our side. And I just said, "I'll kill it." And everyone's like, "No, you idiot! Why would you do that?"
That's I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. That's down to your dungeon master style, which is another important consideration when you sit down at the table, is making sure what you want from the game is what everybody else wants from the game. Like, some people want to be cracking jokes and stuff. I sat down at a table one time where our quest was to hunt down the evil orc Osama bin Laden.
Oh.
And I'm just like,
subtle parallel to real life politics, I see.
Well, but like, it's also like, and then everybody's chuckling, yeah, funny, good one. And I'm like, actually, I don't find that to be all that clever, but the 2 guys that are in my game now, they'll tell you, my world is dark and gritty and brutal and not friendly to those who are, it's way more Game of Thrones than it is Disney.
Yeah, I'll never forget those first group of bandits we tried to redeem. Not that hard.
Oh, Nimbus Innocence was shattered that day.
Yep. Yeah. He's referencing our very first game. Uh, the characters were hired to escort a caravan from point A to point B. Long and short of it is, the roads aren't as safe as they once were. We need protection. So they got hired to protect the caravan. Well, along the way, they ran into some bandits. They fight away the bandits. They track the bandits. They track them back to their headquarters, and from there, proceed to ambush the bandit camp and take several prisoners.
It went exactly as planned. No screw-ups whatsoever. Especially not by me.
Don't you lie to my subscribers. Don't you lie to them.
All right, you want me to tell the story?
I was just going to gloss over that part, but yes, you did almost die.
Yeah, okay. So, hey, I saved the day.
You did, though.
Yeah, so what happened is we are sneaking around the camp. I see the bandit leader's camp. We figure if we kill this guy, the rest of them are gonna surrender. So I go sneaking up to it. I take my dagger. I cut through his tent, all trying to be sneaky. Like he wakes up, and so he's this big, nasty fighter. I'm an elf with a short sword, and I go at him, and he hits me, and he hits me again, and I'm down to 3 hit points. So I run away.
Right.
and I make sure that the party thief is between me and him.
Right. Run for your life. But I guess my point about this story, though, is that they take on these bandits and they take several of them prisoner, and they're starting to notice, hey, all of these guys have no money. Their clothes are worn and torn and rotting. They're all like emaciated and skinny. Okay, we should rehabilitate these people. So we take them back to town, turn them back over to the authorities. Then, okay, great. Drop them off at the jail. Well, they'll be rehabilitated, right? Go off to collect pay for the successful mission, and on their way back to the inn where the whole thing started, they pass by the bodies of freshly hanged bandits.
Yep.
But that was their choice to turn them over to the authorities rather than set them free without really understanding what the authorities were going to do. So but that's the flavor of my game. Very brutal, very dark, very Game of Thrones. What's Tywin Lannister going to do with the bandits you turn over to him?
Yeah.
So if you want to be the good guy, it's harder to do in my game. But that's how I want it. And I told the guys, they didn't necessarily understand how brutal, but I did tell them this is not going to be, sunshine and rainbows and lollipops and unicorns everywhere. It's in a dark.
And you play with that very well, Stephen, because this last weekend.
I'm sorry, Curt. I got to interrupt you. My brother Scott stopped by. I did not have my chat open. Hi, Scott. If you're still there, that's my brother. Go ahead, Curt.
Yeah, we're sorry, I lost a derailed train. Sorry, kablooey.
That's all right. Take your time. You know what? I'm going to look in the chat and see if I did D&D, I'd cast a spell and bring most everyone to my side. I'd probably suck at this game low. No, actually, Sarah, that is one of the best ways to play the game. Play as the person who's always got the right thing to say, who's got a little spell that's going to trick people into thinking. That's actually a fantastic character idea.
I remembered what I was going to say, Stephen, how I had, felt like, getting the hang, of your world, of, how brutal it is. And when when we had having to decide what to do with Darsala, at the big reveal at the end of the day was that being showing some kindness to her, helping her turn her away from the evil forces she was working with, was actually
Right.
at on like your I wouldn't say goal, but a marker to see what we would do in that situation.
Right.
And that was was not considering that at all. I was just like, this lady has a ring, and like if I get it, I will be more powerful for next session.
Not just more powerful, but even much more powerful.
Yeah, and the consideration that like showing virtue in this moment would, I was like, like more like this is the down and dirty world, and I got to figure out how to climb up and succeed to, get things to happen. And like, and so that like, it was actually this morality test that I wasn't even aware I was really playing, that like, was like, okay, that was such a really fun reveal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that is part of the dungeon master's job, is to create situations that are interesting, and it's up to the players to take an interest and to have a reason. You like, okay, for instance, Patrick, you wanted to take that ring really bad. I know you did.
Yeah.
But if Patrick, you yourself was in that situation, you would not behave as your character did. But that's good role playing. He's playing the character. Just like, Jack Gleason, who plays Joffrey, is probably a really, really nice guy. Everything I've heard says he's a nice guy, but he plays the worst shit on the freaking I can't. What's bigger than the entire universe? I don't know, but
multiverse.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what the game is. And sometimes as the dungeon master, I come up with an idea and I'm like, oh, this is going to be hard. And then the players are just like, nope, we found a loophole and it's easy. And sometimes I'm like, oh, this shouldn't be that hard. And I've sat an hour waiting for people to figure out a clue that I've laid out before. Not in my current game, but it has happened.
It was fun when after the direwolf fight, and you were like, you could have just stayed on your horses, guys.
We didn't have to fight them at all. We took so much damage from those direwolves.
The funny part was like these direwolves emerged from the bushes to attack your party, and I forget who it was, but somebody like just jumped straight off their horse and went to shooting their bow, and I'm like, okay, I guess this is happening this way then.
That would have been Antian.
Yeah, I thought so. That was our elf rogue.
Yeah.
But I want to also, like, people, I'm not keeping as close an eye on the chat as I should, but feel free to ask questions, make comments. I was looking at some of the earlier stuff, and I believe it was Evil Ducky said something about Vampire the Masquerade, which is a game that I am, if D&D is my most familiar game, Vampire the Masquerade is probably my number 2. And the conceit of that particular game is that every character, every player is a vampire, is playing a vampire. Now, which makes you very powerful in relation to humans, but you generally start the game as one of the weakest vampires there is. And you can they're different based on what clan they come from, which are specific bloodlines. And I really enjoyed Vampire the Masquerade for the world building they had. I actually thought their system, like the mechanics of the game, were not that strong, but it also gave me it led to the favorite question I've ever been asked as a game master. And I'm gonna my brother Scott says Paradox Interactive is creating a Vampire the Masquerade game. I would be into that. It's a great world to play around in. But okay, so vampires can have different powers based on what their specific bloodline is, and one of the players in this game of Vampire was playing He was empty-handed, but he wanted to attack somebody. So he grabbed the nearest thing at hand. We were on the street out in front of a biker bar. So what's the closest thing at hand for a very, very strong and powerful vampire?
Motorcycle.
A motorcycle.
So he's like, so he picks up his dice, he shakes his hands for a second, and he looks at me and he asks the best question I've ever been asked as a game master. And he said, how much damage does a motorcycle do? And I'm just like, that's great. I didn't think about putting motorcycles there to be used as weapons. That was his idea. Nope, I'm strong enough to pick up 800 pounds. This motorcycle is probably 600. I can grab it by the front fork and just swing it and slap some guy in the head with it. But as a game master, you have to have an answer for how much damage a motorcycle does, even though that's not in the rule book. So being a dungeon master is not for most people, especially early on. But I also think that hold on, no, we're good. I also think that dungeon mastering can be a great outlet for people who are obsessed with their fandoms that don't always turn out the way they want them to. I mean, there are elements, most of you here, if not all of you here, are going to share my great big fandom of A Song of Ice and Fire. I think we're all throners on some level. That's how I know most of my nerd friends these days. But like, our current D&D game is heavily influenced by certain theories from the Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones community that may or may not be real, but in my game world, they are real. And that's not something you get to do all the time. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep up with the chat at the same time. I'm not good at this live streaming thing yet, but if I keep doing it, I'll eventually get there.
Hell yeah. But yeah, so yeah, I'm. If I can do a little like.
Go right ahead, man.
Yeah. So I have the least experience playing D&D of these guys, and I've played a handful of sessions with Dungeon Master that turned out to all he wanted to talk to me about was MRA stuff. So I stopped playing in that campaign.
Okay.
And
good choice.
Yeah.
They wanted to talk to you about what?
Men's rights activists.
Oh.
You do not want to go down that rabbit hole.
No. Okay. As soon as you tell me what it is, I'm like,
yeah.
I'm so far away from that community, I don't even recognize you.
Yeah. So like, he was a good dungeon master, except for that one thing that kept poisoning everything else. So anyway, like, I finally found it, but like, yeah, I didn't get how much I wish, someone could travel back in time and hand me that box set, when I was 8 years old, because it was all video games for me, all playing, the 18th generation cousin of D&D. And when I finally, and I always thought I would enjoy it the more I learned about it, but I didn't know anybody that played, and it just never happened until I got in my late 20s. And then just like, and now I want to DM as well, just because I have ideas for, stories and worlds that I'm just like, well, I didn't feel up to devoting, like, this is going to be my novel, but now like, oh, it can be a world where I can just set up this part of it, and then other people, my friends, can help me open different doors and see how we can flesh out this world. Like the possibility.
Playing the game and writing novels can go hand in hand.
They really can, but I do want to interject a thought here. If you're a dungeon master, you don't write a novel. Although, because your players are not going to do what you want them to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, your players are the ones who drive the story. You provide the world for them to do the story. And if you try and force your story on them, they're going to rebel against it.
That's a good point. Like as the dungeon master of our game, I have more power, quote unquote, and authority, quote unquote, over what happens in the game. But if I'm doing it right, the main changes to the story should not come from me. They should come from the players. You know, I'm the one deciding, you know, when they go through door A, what's on the other side of door A? How, you know, it's a goblin asleep on a pile of treasure. What do you do? And then one of them might be, I want to sneak up on it. And they try to sneak. Okay, roll dice. If you roll bad, okay, well, you trip over and you trip and knock over some rocks, and he wakes up real quick. And then my other player says, okay, I'm going to think fast, and I'm going to try to say, wait, we're friends. And so you roll your persuasion skill, and if that's successful, great. And if not, maybe there's a fight, and then you roll dice to see if you hit. And a lot of the fun of the game, though, is in coming up with these unique ways of getting around problems. You don't have to hacking and slashing your way through everything is not always the answer. Although if that's the game you want to play, that's if you're having fun, you're doing it right. Oh man. Bernie says, stop by to say hello. I used to smoke pot, drink beer, and pass out when my friends played D&D. I remember them having a few fights, LOL. Yeah, that's for when the dungeon master is like, yes, Vanessa, most of the game is about imagination and it's about imagination, and I'm not sure manipulation is the right word, but sometimes it is.
I got suggestion, command, you know, it can, yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing, there's no, like I say, there's no right or wrong way to play the game technically, but there are things that can happen that will cause a game to end. And that's usually going to be, it's a feeling of being unfairly treated is 9 times out of 10 been my experience why somebody will leave. You know, there's personality clash or my dungeon master's out to get me and I don't want to play in that game. But
yeah, and so like one thing that just touching real quick, like, yeah, play with your friends, but you know, get a group together, you know, that of you know, friends. But it's such an interesting way to interact with your friends, just in this era when we're all spread across the globe.
It's a good way to just make friends. Like I didn't really know either of the two of you before I started playing.
Right. I kind of knew you from Twitter interactions a little bit, Patrick.
Yeah.
And I will you pop up in chats here and there.
I do want to take a little bit of credit for, you know, like once, you know, I found out Steven was so into D&D, I was like, yeah, let's get a game together. Yeah, let's do this. Because I was like,
you're kind of responsible.
I was new to this community, and, you know, I just was falling in love with it. And like, you know, I realized, you know, you were such a great guy. And I'm like, yeah. And then like, this is a way to branch out and meet more people and connect and make friends. And yeah, like I've moved around a bit. My family's moved around a bit. It's hard to make friends as an adult. You know, you just don't, I don't have a day job. I got a sugar mama who brings home the money and I make sure the kids stay alive. And
get it.
yeah, not complaining, but in the, you know, my friends are scattered to the winds, and so this, like, I don't know, if anyone feels lonely and like they don't have enough social interaction, get a D&D game together. Like, stuff is so much fun.
Hold on, Duncan the Small needs to have like an award given. He needs recognition right now for that last statement. He says, I'm a cook and I used to get off late at night and all my roommates would be drunk, so I'd feed them in the middle of their D&D campaigns. You are a true hero, sir.
Like that,
true hero.
I hope they wrote you into the game and like had like a magical cook that, you know, made everything better or something, because that deserves some game recognition, definitely.
Evil Ducky, I played with my mom as well. I have played, technically it was Pathfinder, not Dungeons and Dragons. It's Pathfinder it's a role-playing game too. It's just a different system. But yeah, I played with my mom too. And yes, she was also savage. She played a barbarian, like a rage-filled face masher.
Reminds me of the time I tried to get my mom to play Halo. It did not go well.
Right?
My mom cannot figure out how to go upstairs. Like, it's just walking forward. Like,
Funny.
Yeah, after a couple of minutes of her staring at the ceiling, I was like, all right, we'll move on, Mom.
Something I do want to bring up for those of you that are less familiar with this hobby is that I'm using Dungeons and Dragons as the base for this conversation, but there are literally hundreds of different role-playing games, each with their own flavor, each with their own world that they play in, each with their own different styles. And Dungeons and Dragons is built from the ground up to be is highly inspired by the writings of Robert E. Howard. So, like Conan the Barbarian was the main, but not the only fantasy inspiration for the game. There's also a lot of Lord of the Rings.
Obviously, Tolkien, yeah.
Yeah.
Lovecraft.
Yeah, there are some Lovecraft influences as well, especially like there. Any fans of Stranger Things might recognize the Mind Flayer, the words Mind Flayer as the season 2 big bad thing. Well, a Mind Flayer is an original creature from Dungeons and Dragons that is highly inspired by Lovecraft.
Yeah. So the Demogorgon from season 1 is also named after a Dungeons and Dragons creature.
It is one of the Lords of Hell, if I'm remembering correctly, or it's either a demon lord or a devil lord. I can't remember which. And yes, there's a difference in Dungeons and Dragons. But I have played, I couldn't tell you exactly, but probably close on to 40 or 50 different RPGs. And they all have their bonuses. So if medieval swords and sorcery style fantasy roleplay isn't what you're into, play Shadowrun, set 50 years in the future where people have cybernetic enhancements and most of the player characters are going to be these like mercenary corporate espionage for hire types. Or you could play
Star Wars ones too.
There's Star Wars ones, there's Star Trek ones. I've played them both. I've played for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I've played games set as military personnel in World War III. I've played post-apocalyptic style games.
Steve, I need to find it somewhere. I bought it. I bought the Firefly D&D game, and I never played. I was the nerd who just bought it for the stats and everything like that. Never even played it or anything like that. Just wanted it because I had the logo, and I wanted to know. And I want more Firefly lore. Like they know more planet names and stuff. Like I love that. But like,
there's Call of Cthulhu is a pretty good one.
Yeah, Call of Cthulhu is great because like Call of Cthulhu is the only game I've ever heard of where like playing a total coward might be the best sort of way to go.
Yeah.
I could play.
Yeah, the only way to win is not to play in that game.
Evil Ducky says, I played a post-apocalypse. One of my friends set up like The Walking Dead. Elite Dangerous takes place in the year 3305, and it's wonderful. So that's ridiculous Ed Tollett. Yeah, I've played a game called Paranoia. Anybody familiar with Paranoia?
I've heard of that one.
So in Paranoia, you play as a clone of a person serving the great computer, which runs all of society. Your rank in society is based on your color. Everybody starts off as red. And then basically you have to bootlick, ass kiss, swindle, sneak, lie your way up to, orange being the next one because it goes through the color of the rainbows. But because you're a clone, it has a built-in like lives system. So if you die, and you will, you get to come back as the next iteration of your clone.
Yeah, you gotta rat out your other players so the computer will punish them. And not you.
Right. Trust the computer. The computer is your friend. Think of 1984, but also very silly. Like in one of my games, a character I was playing in this one, but it wasn't my character. I don't remember whose it was, but there was a character who was getting big for their britches, and so somebody put a car bomb on their car, and then he turns on the car bomb, blows up the car and himself in the process, dying, right? His next clone is then executed for the crime of his previous clone, which is destruction of computer property. When he blew himself up, he destroyed computer property and he needed to be punished for that. That's the type of game Paranoia is. It's very silly, can be a lot of fun, not to be taken overly seriously. Others, like the White Wolf style of games, Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, are set in a world that is our world in the modern day, but like all the history is reimagined with these shadowy groups. You know, there are groups of vampires that are pulling the strings, but they're not out in the open because it's far too dangerous. And that's a world where it's our world, but everything good about our world is halved and everything bad about our world is doubled. Kind of like the world we live in today, as opposed to the one we lived in 15 years ago when I started playing those games. But yeah, there's a flavor of game out there for everyone. There's a game out there for everyone. There's a game table out there for everyone. You just have to know what you want, and you might not find it the first one you go to. But if you're interested in playing and you don't know where to start, one of the best ways, like we play over Google Hangouts over the internet. That's what my group does. We don't sit down at a table. I don't have a lot of elaborate maps, and you don't need it. If I can describe a situation well enough that everybody can understand it, and then Curt and Patrick and the rest of my players can describe their actions well enough that I can comprehend them, we can tell the story together. And that's how we do it. But if you want to have a real table experience, check out your local comic book shop. Most of those are going to have at least maybe like a cork board where people will have, I'm looking for game, or ask the people that are there, ask the people that work there. That's how I found several of my games, just going to a place that supports the hobby, like your comic shop, your card shop, your gaming stores, and just ask the people that are there. They're there for a reason.
All right, I might make a plug. If you enjoy Dungeons and Dragons, check out the webcomic Order of the Stick.
I'll need to check that one out.
Oh, Evil Ducky says he met that his mom took him to the library to meet gamers, I guess. Which, hey, I never did that, but that's not the worst idea I've heard.
Good library if they're doing that.
Yeah, for real. The library might even.
Yeah, there's a website you can go to called Roll20 where you can find people to play games with too.
I'm sorry, Ducky. Did I assume your gender incorrectly? My deepest apologies if that's the case. I may have said he, and Evil Ducky is a she. I'm waiting on confirmation. And if so, I will give myself 1,000 lashes.
Who's the real Evil Ducky?
Right. It is me. I'm sorry, Evil Ducky. My apologies. I will remember that you are a lady person from now on. And it is a male-dominated hobby at this point, although that's clearly changing, and I need to get with the times a little bit and update the way I think about the game. I tend to think of it as 5 guys sitting around a table because that's what it was for the first 15 years I played the game. We were all nerds in the 80s when I was playing. We were the social outcasts. We didn't have girlfriends and stuff that wanted to hang out. But, you know, I have played with many ladies at this point, including my mother. My oldest daughter has played a little bit. I've played with ladies I'm not related to. Right. You were usually the only girl. That doesn't really surprise me. Although that is, again, changing, it seems like. Sarah says local libraries in Asheville do that. some libraries in New Orleans held D&D nights too. It's not a thing I'm used to seeing, but I just may have grown up in a lame ass town.
Or maybe the libraries are getting with the times. So
Right.
To that.
But if anybody's got questions, go ahead and throw them into the chat. Asheville is awesome. I believe you. If you've got questions for me or either of my guests, throw them in the chat. Curt, if you got some questions, I know you said you might have some. Go ahead and get them ready. Throw them in the chat. I'll get to them in a minute. But I have an announcement to make about my next video, and I am super excited about this. Okay. I'm starting a new series. It will be airing. We will be live streaming 2 weeks from today. It will be a little bit later in the day than normal because I have to wait on somebody. But I'm starting a new series called I Know That Nerd. Like, I know that nerd. And I'm going to have, as my first guest ever, the wonderful Sandrixian on my channel, answering questions, digging into who she is as a person, what motivates her, what she loves about our shared fandom. And so I'm going to have a nice long sit down conversation with Sandrixian, aka Mallory Dorn. Most of you are going to know her art pretty well at this point. So come by in 2 weeks and check that out because it's going to be awesome.
Your picture right there is one of hers, isn't it?
Yes, my icon that I'm using right now. I'm sorry, I'm in a motel room. I'm on the road for work, so I'm just like, I've got the icon up. But yes, that's some Sandrixian art that you're seeing right this moment. So that will be at 7 o'clock Central Time, 2 weeks from today on April the 8th. And we'll have the Sandrixian I Know That Nerd. And I will be doing other episodes of I Know That Nerd where I have a guest come on and we talk about life, the universe, and everything. So if you've got somebody, yes, Bernie, I'm naked. You caught me. I'm sitting around in my undershorts.
That's his default state of being.
Yeah, but so if there's somebody you'd like me to have on, let me know because I'll see about getting them on. But okay, so I'm going to look back through the chat and see about questions.
And so, yeah, yes, Stephen, we hit on most of the stuff I was going to ask you about world building a little bit. But that is awesome. that is a hell of a bomb to drop,
Right.
man.
I'm super pumped about it.
That is fantastic. That is I'm super hyped for that, man. That's I'm going to be all about that.
Okay, so Bernie asks, have you ever heard of the Freeport trilogy or Warhammer RPG books? An old friend of mine wrote them, big D&D guy. I have played the Warhammer RPG. I don't know that I'm familiar with the Freeport trilogy, but you know, it's cool that you know somebody and Warhammer, that's a big license. That's a big deal, actually. And if you think my game is brutal, man, Dungeons and Dragons is easy to survive compared to Warhammer. You get killed fast in that game. Looking for any other questions. Shout out to Sandrixian. Okay, sorry. Yes, Sarah, you're right. She is super talented. She has calendars. She has prints. She has stickers. Matter of fact, Bernie or Ed, can you drop a link to her website in the chat? I'm sure most of you know who she is, but for the one or two of you that don't, you know, she's definitely worth checking out. Okay, Ducky, thanks for coming. Appreciate you stopping by. So, Curt, you said you were going to have some pre-prepared questions?
But world building, yeah. Just FYI, I'll try to get him up here. I gotta switch over to watching my kid in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So I'll move things. I can potentially see how much he's willing to ignore me and watch the TV for a little bit, but I should probably get going.
Okay.
But like, Mainly with, world building stuff about, you know, where I wonder is, how many tent poles do you need, how per like, this build, when you build a building, how much do you fill out that building before anyone
Right.
goes in, or when like, or characters too. Like that's probably more of a big point, like, because you don't want, to be bad guy A, you want them to have some flavor, but you don't even know if they're going to meet that guy potentially.
Right. Well, part of that, okay. I have the benefit of having played for 35 years. I get to recycle some of my characters. But also, when you are 13 years old and you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, but it's Wednesday night and it's a school night, what do? Well, you sit down with your player's handbook and you just make a character that you never play. And then you do that again the next night. And then before long, you have 50 characters and they can be drawn upon, or elements of them can be drawn upon for use as a dungeon master.
Yeah, that's what I do in my free time when I'm planning games that I'm going to be DMing. Is I use a site called Mythweavers, and I just create random NPCs on there, and I just write up their stat sheets. I save them, so
Yep.
I have those to call upon whenever I need a character.
And
Nice.
there are handy charts out there you can look up online where it's basically, it's 100 different, personality traits, and you just roll 2 or 3 randomly, and then all of a sudden this set of 6 numbers and 3 words can become a person. I'm going to look into the chat and see about questions. Sarah says, I'm a neutral, maybe chaotic good in real life, but that doesn't count with regard to characters, right? I'm not sure what question you're asking, but it definitely can have in-game effects depending on your alignment. Not as much as you might think, but maybe more than you think. I don't know what you think.
It's important for clerics.
It is.
Yeah.
Very important.
And there's some like items that will mess around with your alignment. Most of the time, alignment is basically just a suggestion of how you want to play your character, though. So it's not like you pick chaotic good and then you must be chaotic and good at all times. It's like,
right.
Like this is how I want to play the character. This is the alignment that most fits my play style. So I'm going to choose that one.
Right. Melina Prostov, Pozdrov, Melina. She asks, have I ever played Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu? I played Pandemic, not Reign of Cthulhu. I would love to try that, though. Okay. So, but for those of you that are thinking about maybe taking on the Dungeon Master role, we'll talk about that a little bit, because it's a tough one. Oh, that's correct, Isabel or Sarah. Your character's alignment does not have to align with your own. I tend to think of myself as chaotic good, doing the right thing even if I have to kill everybody in the room to do it. But I've played mean, evil, horrible people before in game. We have a term for the people who go around killing everybody.
Murder hobo.
Murder hobos. They don't actually have a home to go home to, and they kill everybody they meet. And
AKA me playing Skyrim.
Right, murder hobo. Because that's how some people play the game. But alignment is a suggestion of where your moral and ethical compass points. Yeah, Melina, I bet it is. Anything with Cthulhu in the name is probably a dark game. But for those of you that are thinking about being a dungeon master, your best bet for your first game or two is to get one of the published ones that's pre-written, has all the necessary information about what type of enemies they'll face, what type of environmental hazards they might face, be it a swamp, is it rainy, are you going to have to scale the side of a cliff to get to your destination, and it has everything you need to tell that contained story. But after you've done that for a while, a lot of dungeon masters will sort of build out their own game world. Like, we have a whole game world that we play in that is used just for us. It's our world. It's the one that they're playing in. It's the one I kind of built, but they're changing the face of it with the actions they take. They're changing the future of it based on the actions they take. But like the kingdoms and societies and cultures and customs and what have you is stuff that I'd been working on for quite a long time. Yes, Sarah. That is, in fact, Outer Panda, aka Curt.
Howdy, howdy.
But and I find that to be a very rewarding experience because I'm a storyteller, but I can't sit at a computer and write a story. God only knows why I can't bring myself to do that, but like I don't have that. But what I do have is, all right, you've been riding for 3 days in the rain down the muddy track and you're soaked to the bone and freezing, but you come across this little inn on the side of the road. Smoke comes from the chimney poking out of the second floor thatched roof. You make your way inside the front door. You're immediately hit by the smell of roast pig and your mouth begins to water. It's dim, but light enough that you can see a few patrons at the tables. Behind the bar is a stout man with a short beard. He glances at you dismissively and says, "Find a table. A wench will be along in a moment." What do you do? I love that stuff. And then the players will tell me, I want to go up to the bar and get a drink, and then they're going to haggle over the price of the drink, maybe, or maybe they're going to look for, hey, is there any, we're a bunch of rough and tumble types. Is there anybody around here that needs help from us rough and tumble types? Or maybe they want to try to pick the pocket of somebody who's sitting at one of the tables because we're low on coin. I don't know how we're going to pay for a room without stealing money from somebody else. As the dungeon master, you have to be able to react to all of those situations. And I find it's a really fun mental exercise to tell the story that way. And as a player, the players are the main drivers of the story. Again, the reason they're rolling up on this, excuse me, on this inn that I just described to begin with is because of some decision they made before that brought them this way. I hope I've painted a pretty clear picture of what it is by this point. I think I have. But when you're world building, though, like world building with anything, if you're writing a story, you know the elements that are going to be important for your story. And I know some of the elements that are going to be important for our story, but some of the choices that Curt and Patrick and our other two players have made, both in the game and about who their characters were before the game, have changed the game world and forced me to consider things that I hadn't before. For instance, Patrick, your character, Star that brings the new dawn, is a wood elf who has left his homeland. And when you and I were discussing your backstory, we talked about a peculiar way that that specific group of elves interacts with the world around it, so to speak. And you were like, nope, I don't want to do that. I want to come from another sect that's got something totally else going on. And I hadn't considered that. But it forced me to go, okay, this needs to fit because this is the character that Patrick wants to play. I need to speak to that. And so that, again, that's more of the collaborative storytelling process. I'm really going on and on and on. I could talk all day about D&D. I'm trying not to get too deep, actually.
Do you got any questions from chat?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen any questions just real recently.
Wanted to introduce my littlest guy.
Hey, littlest guy. How you doing, man?
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Calvin, can you say hi? Can you say hi, buddy?
Hi, Calvin.
That is Shy Guy.
Yeah.
All right. I got to get going, guys. This was a whole lot of fun.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
gonna take red if I don't.
it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like I've got. It doesn't seem like there's any questions in the chat either. And this, we got through most of the stuff that I was trying to get through.
Oh, yeah. Before I get going, I did really want to mention, if people wanted more info and stuff, I think it's episode 170 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a good history of Dungeons and Dragons. So what you had at the beginning there, Stephen, was awesome. But I think it's also a good compliment to that. And then I have my buddy's podcast, Playing Rough. The co-host John Minzer is a buddy of mine, and they did a deep dive on D&D episode. I think it's episode 68, which is really a whole lot of fun. If this wasn't enough, I'd highly recommend those.
If you send me those links, I will put them into the description of the video.
Definitely, we'll do.
All right, cool.
All right, peace out,
Curt,
party people.
Thanks for coming, Curt. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, yes. See you next session.
Bye, man.
Vanessa, that is one of the best questions. How many players are usually in a campaign?
The classic number that, including the DM, is usually 5. The game's kind of set up with the expectation that you're going to have a 4-player party with each player filling out a different role. So the 4 classic roles are, you have your sort of your meat shield guy up front with the big weapons. You have a spellcaster. You have a healer like a cleric, and then you have a skill-based character like a rogue. And so each player, they support the other one, and they each have a different role that they fill. Right. So nobody's redundant, and everybody has a part.
Yeah, and that's basically the answer I was going to give. 3 can usually be enough, and 5 is usually also fine. The thing to consider is when you're trying to tell a story, the more people you have telling that story together, the longer it takes. Because when we're having a fight, for instance, I have to ask Patrick what he's doing, then Curt what he's doing, then my other 2 players what they're doing, then all of my monsters that are fighting against them have to do what they're doing. And if there's more people in the party, that means needs to be more monsters to make the same fight an equal challenge. So it can get really out of hand when you get much more than 5 or 6 people. I think 5 is fine. I think 4 is fine. I think 3 is okay. I think 6 is okay. Less than 3 and more than 6, I wouldn't really want to do. Although on Critical Role, they sometimes have like 7 or 8 even. But Matt Mercer is a better dungeon master than I am. So there's that. But yeah, Vanessa, usually like the classic party, like he says, has 4. A fighter, a wizard, a healer, and a sneaky guy. Is there a specific set of rules? There is. So, and that's going to depend on what exact role-playing game you're playing. We are playing, in my game, 5th edition D&D. That tells you how to determine your character's strengths and intelligence and how nimble they are and what their force of personality is. Hey, Sanri, how you doing? I'm glad you made it. I told everybody about I'm in a motel room and I don't have very good internet, Sanri, so I'm just trying to keep my bandwidth as low as possible. But and I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, or did I?
Talking about the rule sets.
Oh yes, we're playing 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, which tells you how to determine all the things about your character, usually by rolling certain amount of dice, and then the number generated by those dice will represent a numerical value that you can assign to something like how strong you are, how smart you are, how tough you are.
Yeah, the game, it has 3 core rule books. There's the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual.
Right.
And So for the player, all you need is the player's handbook. The DM handles the DMG and the monster manual. And so the player's handbook has all the information you're ever going to need to play a basic character. It's got all your classes, all your races, and it tells you how to fight, what weapons and armor you can use, how to cast spells.
Okay.
So everything you need to build a character is in there. And then the Dungeon Master uses the other two books to create adventures and give you enemies to fight.
Right. So Vanessa, you're like, you don't decide, it's luck. Generally speaking, yes, it is luck. But one of the things I want you to understand is, in my game, as the Dungeon Master, I can say, you can't play this type of character, or these are the stats you get, and if you don't want to play that game, that's on you to not play. Most will use a system that generates a heroic style character that that will allow you to not be great at everything, but at least good at the stuff you're supposed to be good at. Yes,
there are methods of character building that aren't based on rolling dice. There's a point-based system where you have you have a specific number of ability points you can choose from.
Right. Instead
so
of
you assign a certain number to each ability, but the higher value of a stat you increase, the more points it takes to do it.
Okay. Ron Collar has said, sorry for coming late. I really like to know how to set up a simple D&D game to introduce my kids to it. I've played but never been a DM. I'm sorry, Bron Holler. It's been a long, long day. If you've been following my drama on Twitter, you know about it. But my suggestion there is to get a starter, a pre-made starter adventure, one that you can buy from a local hobby store, and it's going to depend on. I thought so. I thought you were Bronwyn Holler, but I get confused, and it's been a long, long, crazy day. It's also going to depend on how old your kids are. Like my recommendation for 9-year-olds is actually going to be very different than my recommendation for 12-year-olds. So if you're trying to introduce 9-year-olds to the game, and I was 9 when I first played, a very simple, straightforward, like, you need to go here and kill this thing because it's ravaging the town. That's the best way.
Yeah, for a young kid who's never played before, I don't suggest going in with a big world setup. Just give them a character, a dungeon, and some monsters to fight.
Because speaking from a psychology standpoint, it's about age 12 when most people really develop their empathy to fully, and they can have an idea that, not everybody thinks exactly the same way I do. Like your 6-year-old doesn't understand why you don't want toys for Christmas. They want toys. Surely everybody wants toys. So when you get to your 12-year-olds, that's when you can start introducing some of the more subtle esoteric stuff. So my recommendation for kids age 9 and 11 is to give them an adventure that has a very clear objective, a very clear good and bad option. Don't, let them choose, what type of character to play, but the best way to set it up is to have them make their characters first, so you know what you're working with, and then say, okay, this is what's happening around you. You're in a marketplace shopping for vegetables or whatever. You're traveling down the road because you are two mighty adventurers, and you're just going from town to town, and something terrible happens, and you need to save the girl who's been carried off by these bandits. That would be my advice. And you can keep it really simple. They don't need to have all these esoteric spells. They don't need to have complicated bad guys. Goblins are the best thing. The first thing I ever killed in Dungeons and Dragons was a goblin.
Yeah, when I first started playing, my go-to bad guys were always the kobolds, because the starter set I had a bunch of little figures of them.
Geek's Guide to the Galaxy podcast number 170, The History of Dungeons and Dragons. And what was the other link? Oh, I'm doing two things at once. Sorry. And 61 DMing and RPGs. 68 D&D deep dive. Yeah, I'm gonna look into those for sure, and I will get those links into the description eventually. Okay. Hey, Ed, thanks for coming by, man. I appreciate it. Have a good night. I know you're working, so later. Okay. All right, I'm back, y'all. Sorry, took me a second. Oh yeah, what a shame you have to go back. You know what's another? The dice. The dice for kids can often be a big deal. Getting them their own set of dice makes them feel like they're really engaged in the game, like they have a stake in it. These are my dice. These are the ones I roll for the stuff my character does.
Now, you don't touch another man's dice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, I've got enough that at this point I don't really care that much. But like, if I'm playing a certain character and I have a certain set of dice out, and you're like, "Can I borrow a die?" I'm like, "Yes, but not these. These are for my character."
And veteran players know some dice are cursed. You don't want to use them.
Yeah, Vanessa. There's actually, I'm going to look into it, Vanessa, and I will send you a DM on Twitter. But finding an online D&D game actually should not be that hard. I just wanted to play with people I knew from the fandom, so I kind of threw it out there on Twitter, and I got a couple of answers, and then a couple of friends of a couple of Curt's that he already knew. So that's how I did it. But even if you just like, and that's what it was. It was like, hey, who wants to play Dungeons and Dragons? And it just put it out on Twitter, Facebook, whatever social media you prefer. I'm sure would be a good place to start as well. And I'm not sure where you live, Vanessa. I'm pretty sure you don't live in the United States, if I'm remembering correctly. But the hobby is popular the world over. So I would think that if you can find a gaming hobby store near wherever you live, that you would be able to find a game. So, Patrick, what else you got?
I don't know. Just want to ask about what got us into the game.
Okay. Okay. So you're from Venezuela, but you live in Peru.